Toddler found a German shepherd hidden in a barn hayloft. What happened next left all in tears. Some stories defy logic and others defy expectations. What this child did next will shatter your understanding of love and loyalty. A bond so deep, it saved a life. Like, share, and subscribe. This is the story you'll be talking about long after it ends. The morning was quiet in the small countryside town, the kind of quiet that only fields and barns can hold. Golden sunlight spilled across the grass, painting the fences and rooftops in a soft glow. A little girl, no more than 3 years old, ran across the yard in her tiny blue dress, her laughter rising like music in the stillness. She carried a small wooden toy in her hand, giggling as she chased after the butterflies that danced in the air. For her, the world was simple, full of play and wonder. But then, something broke the silence. A faint sound, so soft it was almost swallowed by the hum of the morning breeze. The little girl stopped in her tracks. She tilted her head, her small hands gripping the toy tighter. It wasn't the sound of birds or the rustling of leaves. It was weaker, sadder, a whimper. Her innocent eyes turned toward the old barn, its wooden beams faded with age, its roof leaning tiredly against the sky. The barn was a place most grown-ups no longer paid attention to, a place too forgotten to matter. But the sound came again, just barely, like a cry tucked away in shadows. The girl's curiosity grew stronger than her fear. Step by step, she wandered closer, her shoes crunching softly on the dirt. Inside, the barn smelled of dust and hay. Shafts of sunlight pushed through the cracks in the wooden walls, cutting the shadows into golden stripes. The little girl looked around with wide eyes, her small frame nearly swallowed by the vast emptiness of the barn. For a moment, it seemed like nothing was there, only silence, only the smell of hay. But then the whimper rose again, this time from above. Her gaze lifted to the hayloft, high above her head. The old wooden ladder creaked under her tiny fingers as she reached out, curiosity pushing her forward. She was too young to understand danger, too innocent to walk away. All she knew was that someone, or something, was calling for help. When she finally peeked over the edge of the hayloft, her breath caught. Hidden deep within a pile of hay, 2 frightened eyes stared back at her. They were the eyes of a German shepherd, wide with fear, cloudy with pain. His body was thin, his fur tangled and dusty. He let out another weak cry, so soft it broke the silence like a whisper of sorrow. The little girl's heart, too young to know cruelty, only knew compassion. She reached out her small hand, her voice barely a whisper. "It's okay. Shoo, don't cry." The dog did not move, only watched her, trapped and trembling, as though waiting for the world to hurt him again. Why was he there? Who had left him hidden in the shadows of the hayloft? The answers would come later. For now, all that mattered was that a child's innocent heart had heard a cry the rest of the world had ignored. This was only the beginning of a story that would shake a small town, heal old wounds, and remind everyone that sometimes the smallest hands uncover the greatest truths. Morning came slow to the edge of town, rolling over the fields like a soft blanket. The old barn sat where the road bent, its boards turned the color of rust and wheat by years of sun and rain. The roof sagged in the middle, like a tired back that had carried too much. A weathered weather vane squeaked when the breeze touched it, and the big doors, once red, now looked brown and tired. The hayloft window watched the road like a single sleepy eye. From far away, the barn looked quiet and gentle. Up close, it felt like a place that remembered more than it let on. People used to gather there long ago. There were harvest nights when lanterns hung from nails in the beams and men stacked bales while boys raced in the dust outside. There were Sunday afternoons when someone would play a fiddle and the children would laugh until the sun slid behind the tree line. But then came years when the fields did not yield much and the work moved elsewhere. A storm tore the side door off its hinges. A beam split. Mice made homes under the floorboards, and birds built nests along the rafters. The barn did not complain. It simply stood and grew older. Most folks in town walked past it without looking. They said the ladder up to the hayloft was missing a rung, that the floor up there was soft in places and could give way. They said snakes liked the cool shadows and raccoons liked the warmth of the straw. Parents told their children to stay away. "It's not safe," they would say, and the children listened. The barn became a shape in the corner of the eye, a place seen but not visited, a story without words. A small house sat next to the barn, with a white fence that needed paint and a porch swing that went when it moved. A grandmother lived there with her little granddaughter while the girl's parents worked long shifts in another town. The girl wore a blue dress most days because she loved how it twirled. She liked to line up her stones on the porch rail and hum little songs she did not know she knew. Her grandmother baked bread on Saturdays and hung quilts on the line, the colors flickering like flags when the wind blew. The girl would bring clothespins, one by one, with the kind of focus only small children have. "Good helper," her grandmother would say, kissing the top of her head, and the girl would smile because the words felt warm. Their days were simple. In the early hours, when the grass was still wet, the grandmother would step outside with a mug of tea and sit on the top stair. The girl would follow, her small feet padding across the boards. They would watch the sparrows hop along the fence. Sometimes a tractor would pass, and the driver would raise 2 fingers from the wheel. The grandmother would raise 2 fingers back. That was enough talk for that time of day. If the sun was kind, they might walk to the edge of the field and pick wild flowers, the girl clutching stems in a fist that was almost too small for the job. If the sun was strong, they stayed closer to the porch and poured water from a cup into the cracks of the steps, watching little rivers appear and vanish. The barn was always there beside them, quiet, still, a big wooden breath that never came out. The girl had been told not to go inside. "You may look from the doorway," the grandmother said, "but you do not go in without me." The rule did not feel mean. It felt like a hand on her shoulder, steady and sure. So the girl would stand in the shade of the threshold sometimes and look at the shapes inside. Old tools hung on hooks. A broken wheel leaned against a post. A coil of rope rested like a sleeping snake on the floor. Dust floated in the light the way snow does on the first day of winter, soft, slow, almost holy. Even the air had a story. It smelled like dry grass and old wood and the faint, sweet memory of animals. If you stood very still, you could hear the barn talk in a low creak when the wind pressed its palm against the boards. From the rafters came the shuffle of wings and the quick tick-tick-tick of a swallow. Every sound was small and far away, as if the barn kept its voice in a pocket and only let a little out. Some people in town said they heard things at night. They said the wind could cry if it found the right hole, and the barn had 100 of them. They said raccoons could thump around like footsteps. One man swore he heard whispering, but his wife said that was just the trees talking to each other. Stories like that grow in the spaces people leave alone. The grandmother did not feed them. "It's an old place," she would say. "Old places make old sounds." That week, the heat had broken after a run of long days, and a soft breeze came in off the fields. The grandmother set a pie on the sill to cool, and the girl spread her stones on the porch steps in a new pattern. Blue, then gray, then the white one she liked best. A grasshopper sprang from the edge of the step, and she laughed, the sound bouncing lightly off the house and the barn and back to her. She lifted her dress just a little and spun once, pleased with the small circle her hem made. "Stay where I can see you," the grandmother called from the kitchen. "I am," the girl answered, and it was true. She was only a little way from the door, in the slice of shade where the barn met the house. The ground there was cool, packed tight by years of steps. She crouched to look at a beetle turning itself over, her hair falling like a curtain across her cheek. When she blew it away, she blew too hard and giggled at the tickle of it. A truck rattled past on the road, then quiet again. An airplane drew a white line across the blue. The porch swing moved once and then settled. The girl counted to 5 without meaning to. When you are small, counting is a game your mouth plays by itself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The barn breathed its dry, wooden breath. She stood and looked toward the doorway, as she often did, curious but not disobedient. Light fell in a thin, bright line across the floor inside. It touched a shovel and made one edge shine. A moth fluttered, then rested. Somewhere high above, a bird made a sound that was more scratch than song. The girl listened. She did not know the word for listening, but her whole body did it anyway. The way her shoulders went still, the way her eyes went soft, the way her fingers let the white stone rest in her palm and forgot to squeeze. The hayloft sat like a shelf along the back wall, its edge dark except where sun slid through a crack and laid a strip of gold across it. A rope hung from a pulley there, frayed and stiff. The ladder that reached up had a missing rung near the middle, a small, sharp mouth where wood had broken clean away. The girl's grandmother had shown her that once, pointing, shaking her head. See? Not safe. The girl remembered. She could feel the shape of the warning like she could feel the seam inside her sleeve. A hush wrapped the doorway, thicker than usual. The girl took one step inside, then stopped with her toes just over the line where light met shadow. She looked up. Something in the loft was different, as if the darkness had shifted its weight. It was nothing you could see, only something you could sense, the way you know when someone steps into a room behind you even before they speak. The first sound was so faint she thought she imagined it. A soft brush, like straw moving against straw. She waited, and the barn waited with her, its old heart beating slow. Then came a small rustle, quick and unsure, as if someone had tried to be silent and almost succeeded. The girl's eyes climbed the ladder rung by rung, following the line of it up to the shadowed edge of the loft. She did not call out. She did not run. She only listened, her head tilted, her blue dress still as painted cloth. The straw whispered again, a little louder this time, and the whisper carried something inside it. A wish, a worry, a small, hidden ache. The girl felt the hairs on her arms lift, not from fear but from knowing that the quiet had a secret. Somewhere above her, tucked deep behind the hay, something or someone had moved. And though she could not yet name what it was, she knew, with the certain heart of a child, that it mattered. She stood in the doorway longer than usual, her toes just past the line where light met shadow. The barn felt bigger today, like it had taken a deeper breath. The sound from above had been small, but it had landed in her chest and stayed there, like a tiny bird trying not to shake. She looked up at the hayloft and then back at the house, where her grandmother's pie cooled on the sill. She knew the rule. She also knew the feeling in her stomach that said someone needed her. She walked to the ladder with the cautious bravery of a child who believes the world can be kind. The wood looked old but not unfriendly. Her small fingers wrapped around the first rung and pressed down to test it. It did not move. She lifted one foot, then the other, the way she'd seen her grandmother climb the porch steps when her knees were stiff, slow, careful, sure. The barn made a soft creak, as if it was listening. Dust rose around her like tiny stars in a sunbeam. She blinked and breathed through her mouth, tasting dry straw and old wood. Each rung took effort. Each step made a quiet thud that seemed much too loud in the stillness. The ladder shook once, just a little, and she paused, cheek against the rail, heart thumping so hard she could hear it in her ears. The world outside kept going. An insect buzzed, a bird clicked. But in the barn, time slowed to the pace of her breath. She remembered the missing rung before she reached it. Her grandmother had pointed it out once with a little frown. Now, seeing the gap, the girl stopped and thought. She placed her left foot on the rung below, leaned into the side rail with her tiny shoulder, and stretched her right foot higher than felt fair. For a moment her toes could not find anything, and her stomach dropped like a stone in a well. Then the ball of her foot found the next rung and pressed. Solid. She pulled herself up, small arms shaking, a sound like a soft ding escaping her. The barn's silence pressed in, but it didn't feel mean. It felt like an old friend holding its breath so it wouldn't scare her. She climbed again. Step, breathe, step, breathe, tiny hands blackened with dust. The hem of her blue dress brushed the ladder and gathered straw, the threads catching on splinters. She stopped once to clear a tickle in her nose, pinching it shut to keep a sneeze from bouncing off the rafters. "Sorry," she whispered to the quiet, as if the quiet had feelings too. Halfway up, the sound came again, a soft rustle, a careful shift. It wasn't the confident scramble of a raccoon or the quick skitter of mice. It was a hesitant, broken kind of movement. She lifted her chin and smiled the kind of small, brave smile that no one had taught her. "I'm coming," she said, but only in her head, because her mouth knew not to send words crashing into the air. She thought about calling for her grandmother. The idea arrived and stood beside her like a second self on the ladder. But the feeling in her chest said loud noises might send the secret deeper into the hay, might turn a scared thing into a hidden thing again. She didn't want that. She wanted whoever was up there to know they had been heard. So she climbed one careful rung at a time, the shadows turning warmer as she rose into the sun-sliced loft. Her hands began to hurt, a small ache at the base of each thumb. She did not stop. She tucked her toy into her pocket so both hands could hold, her fingers curling like little hooks. When she looked down, just once, her belly swooped, the floor felt far away. She put her cheek to the rail again, closed her eyes for a heartbeat, and then kept going. The wood smelled sweet, and the smell made her brave. At the top, the edge of the hayloft was a rough lip of wood. She lifted her chin over it and squinted. The light changed up here, sharper where it fell through cracks, softer where it landed on the straw. Hay was piled in low shapes, edges caved and messy like unmade beds. A length of old rope lay in a lazy curve, its ends rough and frayed. The air was warmer, and her skin felt it. The barn roof held the morning heat like a hand. She didn't climb all the way up. She held herself there, eyes just above the edge, and looked. "Hello," she wanted to say, but her mouth stayed closed. A fly buzzed and then stopped. A mote spun slowly and then slid out of sight. Everything waited. Then she saw them. Not a shape. Not a body. Just eyes, deep and dark, set in a patch of shadow where the hay was thick. They did not shine like a cat's. They were dull with worry, wet at the edges. The eyes were wide, too wide, as if they were trying to pull the whole world inside so it would not leave again. The girl's breath made the barest sound. The eyes blinked once, slow. A head shifted a little, just enough for her to see the hint of a long muzzle and the slope of ears that wanted to be up but were pressed back. A German shepherd. Not a big proud one like she had seen in books. This one was smaller somehow, not in size but in presence, as if fear had made him fold himself small to fit into the space where no one could find him. His fur was dusty and clumped with straw. A few pieces stuck out like thorns. He made a sound then, the smallest whine, like a question that didn't want to bother anyone. The girl's body felt two things at the same time. The first was fear, a shiver that ran up her arms and made her fingers tighten on the wood. He was a dog, a big dog, and she was a little person, alone with him in a high, quiet place. The second was something stronger. It rose up from her stomach and warmed her chest and her face. It felt like when her grandmother wrapped a quilt around her on a cold night and said, "There," with a soft smile. It felt like the opposite of leaving. It was compassion. Her fear did not go away. It sat beside the compassion like rain cloud and sun on the same day. But the compassion leaned forward. She loosened her fingers a little. She moved her mouth, and this time the words came out small and soft and steady. "Hi," she breathed. "It's okay." The dog's ears twitched. His body trembled once, a quick shiver that made the straw whisper. He did not growl. He did not show teeth. He watched her the way someone watches a door when they hope it will open but are scared of what might be on the other side. The girl's heart hurt in a way that made her want to fix something she could not yet name. She slid her knee onto the loft as slow as a minute, and then the other knee, so her shoulders were no longer holding all of her weight. She kept her head low, her eyes kind, her hands open with the palms facing the floor. She had seen a stray cat once, and the neighbor had said, "Don't reach fast. Be small. Be safe." She made herself small the way a child can, shrinking her movements into soft, round shapes. "Shoo," she whispered, the sound barely there. The shepherd's nose lifted a little, pulling in a bit of her scent. The soap from the morning, the flower in the air from the pie, the sun on her dress. His eyes flicked to her hands, then back to her face. He made the sound again, the small whine that was half sorry, half pleased. The girl felt tears prick in the corners of her eyes, not the kind that fall hard, but the kind that gather and make the world swim for a second. She stayed where she was. She did not push closer. She did not run away. The barn felt like a church then, not because of any prayer someone had said, but because of the kind of quiet that holds a promise. She thought about names, dog, friend, shadow, but she didn't speak them. Names were for later, when the ground felt safe under both of them. Her hands trembled once and then settled. She remembered the rule and felt the shape of it again in her mind. But rules also had a heart, and the heart of the rule was to keep her safe. This moment, somehow, felt like a different kind of safety, the kind you make by being gentle. She licked her lips, found them dry, and tried another whisper. "I won't hurt you." Outside, a faint breeze moved the swing on the porch, and the chain made a tiny sound. A bee stumbled along the window frame and drifted away. The world, big and busy, kept going, but up here, in this pocket of straw and light, the girl and the dog held still together. The feeling in her chest, the bird, settled its wings. She thought of her grandmother and the short walk from the ladder to the kitchen. She thought of how her voice would sound if she called, how it would bounce around the rafters like a ball. She thought of the eyes in the hay and how they might flinch at that bounce. So she did not call yet. She let the moment be a bridge, thin but steady, between fear and trust. The shepherd lowered his head a little and blinked again. It was such a small thing. It felt like the opening of a door, an inch only, but still an opening. The girl breathed out slow. "Okay," she said in a hush that barely stirred the straw. "Okay." She did not reach. She did not turn away. She stayed and let her compassion be the loudest thing about her. And in that high, quiet place where voices had not been trusted for a very long time, the first true conversation began, made of breaths and blinks and the soft, shared courage of two small hearts. She did not move at first. She let the quiet settle again and let her eyes get used to the shape of him. The hay clung to his fur like burrs to a coat. Dust had turned parts of him the color of the barn floor, and his sides were so thin she could count the spaces between his ribs when he breathed. The breath itself sounded small, like it had to fight to get all the way in. He wasn't the kind of German shepherd you see in books, strong, bright, ready to run. He looked like a shadow that had been left too long in one place. When he shifted, the hay scratched and she saw more. The skin under his fur held old marks, faint bruises green and purple at the edges, the kind that take time to fade. Near one shoulder a patch of hair was rubbed short, the skin there rough and pink. His paws were dirty and dry, the nails longer than they should be. On one front paw, something worse. A rope, thin and ragged, wrapped around and around above the joint. It had cut into the fur and pressed hard against the skin until it left a deep line, like a mean ring. The place below it was swollen. Every small move pulled at that rope and brought a soft, broken sound out of him. He smelled like old straw and damp wood and a little like fear. She did not know fear had a smell, but up close she could tell it did. He tucked his nose under his chest and then lifted it again, torn between hiding and needing air. When her hand shifted on the floor, he made a sound in his throat. It wasn't a deep growl. It was thin and tired, the sound of someone who wanted to say, "Stay back," but didn't have the strength to say it loud. She stopped moving. She lowered her eyes so he wouldn't feel challenged and turned her shoulder a little so she wasn't straight on. She made herself smaller again, the way she had when she first pulled herself onto the loft. "Okay," she whispered. "I see you." The words were soft enough that they almost didn't exist. She kept her hands open and low. Nothing about her said, "Grab" or "Take." Everything about her said, "I will wait." The growl faded. He watched her with those wide, wet eyes that seemed to carry a whole story she could not read. His ears shifted but stayed pinned back. The rope looked tight. It looked like it had been tight for days. The sight of it made her chest ache in a new way. She wanted to touch it and free it. She wanted to run and call for help. But she knew, without anyone telling her, that fast movements would turn this thin line between them into a wall again. "You must be hungry," she breathed. The thought came with another one, clear as a bell: the crust. That morning, when her grandmother cut bread, the girl had asked for a piece to hold. "Don't take it outside," her grandmother had said, smiling, and then had laughed when the girl tucked the small crust into the pocket of her blue dress like a plan. Now her fingers found it, the hard curve of it, cool and a little greasy from butter that had long since melted away. She moved as slow as time. She slid her hand to her pocket, pinched the crust between two fingers, and brought it out where he could see. She did not lift it high. She didn't shake it or make clicking sounds. She laid it on the flat of her palm and rested her hand on the wood. "Look," she whispered. "Bread." His eyes flicked from her face to her hand. His nose lifted and twitched. He smelled the crust from where he lay, the small muscles in his muzzle quivering with the work. He didn't move closer. The rope had made moving cost more than it should. She pulled a tiny piece off the crust and set it on the hay halfway between them. Then she pulled off another piece and held it still. He watched the closer piece like it might do something. After a long few breaths, he stretched his neck 1 inch, then another. The rope pulled. He flinched. A soft whine slipped out. The girl's mouth opened in a small, "Oh," not loud, just a breath shaped like a word. "Sorry," she said, though she knew the pain wasn't her fault. "It's okay. It's okay." He tried again. His nose touched the hay near the bread. He paused, as if waiting for something bad to happen. Nothing did. He flicked the crumb into his mouth, quick as a fish taking a fly, and then went still again, watching her as he chewed. She didn't move. She let the wind be his. She broke another bit from the crust and set it a little closer to her hand this time. He looked at it. He looked at her. His eyes didn't widen the way they had before. They softened at the corners, just a little, like the first step of a smile that couldn't find its way. He reached and took the piece, less quick this time. She felt her own breath release, a long, slow thread. "Good," she whispered. "Good boy." The words came out without thinking, the way water finds a low place. She didn't know his name. She didn't know if anyone had ever called him good before. But the word felt right in the air between them. Up close, she could see how thirsty he looked. His tongue moved over his dry nose after each bite. He swallowed with a tiny hitch, as if even his throat was tired. She wished she had water. She had only the bread, and the bread was small. She broke it into the tiniest bits she could to make it last, to make the moments last. Each piece was another chance to show him that hands could give without taking. Once, when she pulled a crumb free, a flake fell and landed near her fingertips. He stretched, slower now, and his nose brushed her skin. It was warm and damp, and the touch surprised her so much she almost giggled. She bit the sound back, not wanting to startle him. He took the crumb and lingered with his nose near her hand, drawing in her scent the way he had before, as if committing it to a place inside himself where it might mean safety later. The rope around his paw moved when he shifted. The skin there twitched with pain. She looked at it and then at his eyes. "That hurts," she said softly, and her face folded with the kind of worry that has no plan yet. He followed her gaze to his own paw, as if seeing it through her for the first time. He didn't pull it away. He didn't push it forward either. He breathed, and the breath shivered. He made the sound again, that small, tired growl, but it faded into something else at the end, a whine that held a question. The girl answered with stillness, with the open shape of her hands, with crumbs offered and not taken back. She did not try to touch him. She did not try to move the rope. She knew, in the simple, clean way children know things, that trust isn't something you grab. It's something you let grow. Piece by piece, the crust became less. His mouth worked, careful, grateful. The harsh lines in his face softened a little. His eyes blinked more slowly now, like someone letting their guard down by degrees. The barn around them listened and said nothing. Dust spun and settled. The shaft of sunlight that cut across the loft slid the smallest bit along the floor, marking the quiet time they were building together. When the last crumb sat in her palm, she did not pull it away. She let him take it right from her hand. His tongue grazed her skin and left a wet trace that cooled in the moving air. She smiled without showing teeth. He looked at her for a long second, not at the bread, not at the floor, at her. And in that look there was something new. It wasn't trust yet, not fully. It was the first thin thread of it, a small bridge stretched from his fear to her kindness. She didn't rush to cross that bridge. She sat with it. "I'll help," she whispered, barely louder than a thought. The words felt like a promise she could not keep alone. They felt true anyway. He blinked again, and his ears loosened a hair from their tight press against his head. Somewhere outside, the porch swing creaked once. A bird called and then fell quiet. The world waited, and in the waiting, a bond began to knit itself out of small things. Crumbs, breaths, the hush of a child's voice, the brave patience of a hurt dog. In the dim light of the loft, where shadows had learned to hide everything that hurt, something else finally learned to show itself. It was not big. It was not fast. It was enough to begin. The girl sat in the hayloft until the last crumb of bread was gone, her small hand resting on the floorboards, empty but still open. The German shepherd's eyes no longer looked as sharp with fear, but they were not calm either. His breaths came fast, and every now and then, the rope around his paw twitched and made him wince. She wanted to stay with him forever, but something inside told her that the dog needed more than her tiny hands could give. He needed someone stronger. Someone who could take away that cruel rope and the pain that came with it. Her little voice carried across the barn. "Grandma," she called softly at first. Then louder, "Grandma." From the house came the sound of a door creaking, then hurried footsteps across the yard. The grandmother's heart nearly stopped when she saw the blue dress high up in the hayloft. "Child, what are you doing up there?" she cried, her voice sharp with fear. But before the girl could answer, the shepherd let out a sudden, weak snarl. It was not a loud or angry bark. It was a sound born of panic, of an animal caught between wanting to trust and being too broken to try. The grandmother froze where she stood, her eyes widening as she finally saw the shape in the hay behind her granddaughter. "Dear Lord," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. The girl's voice trembled, but it was steady with compassion. "He's hurt, Grandma. He's stuck." The grandmother's face softened, but her hands still trembled. "Come down, love. Slowly now. Don't upset him." With careful steps, the child climbed back down the ladder, her eyes never leaving the dog's frightened gaze. When her feet finally touched the ground, she ran into her grandmother's arms, burying her face against the safe warmth of her apron. Word travels fast in small towns, faster than the wind over wheat fields. By the time the sun had tilted past noon, neighbors were already walking up the lane. Some carried ropes, some carried lanterns, and one brought a long ladder strapped to the bed of a truck. Their boots crunched in the dirt as they gathered near the barn, their voices buzzing with questions. "What's in there?" "A dog," she says. "Up in the loft? How'd it get there?" When the girl pointed toward the hayloft window, the murmurs grew heavier. They could hear it now too, the occasional whimper, faint but real. A man rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "I thought I heard something nights ago," brushed it off as raccoons. Another shook his head, guilt thick in his voice. "I heard it too. Never went to check." The grandmother frowned at them both. "My little one had to be the only heart listening," she said, her voice breaking. Inside the barn, the shepherd had retreated deeper into the hay, eyes flashing in the dim light. When one man climbed halfway up the ladder, the dog's growl filled the air, stronger than before, but still carrying that edge of pain. The man froze. "He doesn't want us near," he called down, scared out of his mind. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy looks. They wanted to help, but fear held them back. A strong dog, even weak and hurt, could lash out. The girl tugged her grandmother's apron and whispered, "He won't hurt us if we're gentle. He's just scared." The grandmother nodded slowly, repeating her granddaughter's words to the crowd. They worked out a plan. 2 men would steady the tall ladder against the loft. Another would climb with a blanket in his arms. A woman, the town's vet, had hurried over after hearing the commotion. She stood ready with a leather glove and a kind voice. The girl watched with wide, worried eyes as the ladder creaked under the rescuer's weight. Every step made the dog's growls deepen. When the man reached the loft, the shepherd snapped his jaws, not in attack, but in warning. His body shook, cornered and unsure. "Easy, boy," the man said, his voice low, as though talking to a child. The vet called up softly, "Don't stare at him direct. Keep your body sideways." But the shepherd's fear ran deeper than words could soothe. He pressed back into the hay, rope digging into his paw, eyes wild. He barked once, sharp and broken, a sound that made the little girl flinch. Her grandmother squeezed her shoulders. "He's only frightened," she whispered. "That's all." The rescuer laid the blanket slowly across the boards and slid it closer, inch by inch. The shepherd's growl rattled, but his body swayed, too weak to stand tall for long. The girl could see the truth. He wanted to fight, but he had no strength left. When another man climbed up with a pair of cutters for the rope, the dog's ears twitched, his body quivered, and then, suddenly, he gave a long, tired cry. It was not the cry of warning anymore. It was surrender. It was the sound of a heart that could no longer carry its own pain. In that moment, the shepherd stumbled forward, collapsing onto the blanket with a heavy thud. The rescuer caught him, arms straining under the weight, and the crowd below gasped. The man with the cutters leaned in quick, snapping the rope free from the swollen paw. The dog whimpered once, his eyes rolling, and then went still in their hold. The rescuer called down, voice trembling, "We've got him." Cheers and sighs filled the barnyard. Some neighbors wiped their eyes, ashamed they had ignored the faint cries for so long. Others clapped one another on the back, grateful that the dog had lived long enough to be found. The little girl's face lit with tears and relief all at once. She clapped her hands together, whispering, "See, Grandma? He's safe now." The men carried the shepherd carefully down the ladder, wrapped in the blanket like something precious. His head hung limp, but his chest rose and fell, slow and steady. The vet crouched the moment they touched ground, pressing her ear to his side, her hand over the freed paw. "Weak, but alive," she said. "He'll need care. He'll need time." The girl reached out, her fingers brushing the shepherd's ear. For a heartbeat, his eye cracked open, just enough to find her face again. She smiled through her tears, whispering words too soft for anyone else to hear. "I told you it would be okay." And for the first time in many, many days, the dog let the weight of his body rest in human arms. Not in fear, but in the smallest spark of trust. ChatGPT said, "The men carried the blanket-wrapped shepherd to the waiting truck as if he were glass. Every step was slow, careful, and the little girl followed close behind, clutching her grandmother's hand but never taking her eyes off him. The dog didn't resist. His body was too tired, his eyes half shut, his breaths shallow but steady. The town's vet had already cleared a space at her clinic, and when they arrived, she motioned for him to be brought inside right away. The clinic smelled sharp, like medicine and clean floors, a smell the shepherd didn't understand. He twitched once, a weak growl rumbling deep in his chest when he was placed on the steel table, but it faded as quickly as it came. The vet's gentle hands moved over his body, her voice low and steady. "He's skin and bone," she murmured. "And this paw," she pointed to the rope wound. The skin there was raw, swollen, and angry. The rope had cut so deep it looked as though it had become part of him. The girl pressed her face into her grandmother's skirt, whispering, "Fix him, please." The vet nodded. "We'll fix him." She slid scissors under the last stubborn fibers of rope and snipped. The shepherd whimpered, but when the rope fell away, it was as if the barn's shadow had lifted too. His paw trembled, free at last. They cleaned it with warm water, the sting making him flinch, and wrapped it gently in fresh white bandages. There were other wounds too, patches where fur was thin, bruises across his ribs, a scrape along his ear. The vet listed them softly, each one a piece of the dog's long suffering, each one needing time and care. When they placed him in a kennel to rest, the toddler climbed up on the stool beside it and pressed her small hand against the bars. "I'm here," she whispered. "Don't be scared." The shepherd's eyes opened just a sliver. He didn't move, didn't lift his head, but he looked at her, and that was enough. Hours turned to days, and the town began to move around the story. People who had once ignored the faint cries now came with gifts. Old blankets were dropped off at the clinic to make the cage softer. Bags of dog food appeared by the door. A boy brought a squeaky toy shaped like a bone, still smelling of the shop it came from. A woman knitted a little pillow and set it under the girl's arm, saying, "For your friend." The toddler carried it proudly into the clinic and tucked it through the bars of the kennel, right where the shepherd's head could rest. The dog ate little at first. His body didn't remember plenty, it only remembered scraps. But with each careful meal, his ribs filled out a bit more. The bandage around his paw was changed daily, the skin slowly knitting itself whole. He winced when the vet touched him, but the girl's hand was always there, steady on the bars, her voice singing small, wordless songs that calmed him more than the medicine did. The recovery was not quick. Some days he only lay there, breathing heavy, eyes closed. But then came the small changes. One morning, when the girl offered him a piece of bread through the bars, his nose touched her palm before he took it. Another time, when she laughed at something her grandmother said, his ears perked faintly, as though the sound was something worth hearing. Then came the moment no one forgot. The girl had brought a soft ball, yellow and round, which she rolled gently across the floor of the kennel. The shepherd's eyes followed it. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then his tail moved, just once, a single wag, hesitant and unsure. The girl clapped her hands, joy bursting from her like sunlight. "Grandma, did you see?" He wagged. The room grew brighter just because of that tiny motion. After that, the changes came faster. His growl faded into silence, replaced by quiet whines when he saw the girl coming. He began to eat from bowls without fear, even licking them clean when he thought no one was watching. The townsfolk who visited noticed how his fur began to shine again, how his eyes lost their hollow sadness. "He looks younger," one man said, marveling at the difference kindness could make. But the bond between the shepherd and the toddler was what everyone spoke about most. She came every morning and every evening, her small feet pattering down the clinic hall. She would sit cross-legged in front of his cage, pressing her face close to the bars, whispering secrets only he could hear. Sometimes she pushed her toy bear against the cage, saying, "He's your friend too." And sometimes she simply sat in silence, her presence speaking more than words ever could. The shepherd, in turn, began to wait for her. His ears would twitch before she even entered the room, as though he knew the rhythm of her steps. When she leaned her hand in, he pressed his nose gently against her fingers, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. The townsfolk who had once walked past the barn without caring now stopped to marvel at the sight. They shook their heads in wonder and guilt. "It took a child to hear him," they said. "And look at him now." Weeks passed, and the shepherd grew strong enough to stand on his legs again. His paw, though scarred, held his weight. His back straightened, his eyes cleared. But the greatest sign of healing wasn't in his body. It was in the way he followed the toddler with his gaze, the way his tail swept the ground whenever she entered, the way his ears softened at her voice. One evening, as the clinic closed, the vet watched the girl lean her forehead against the cage and whisper, "I love you." The shepherd's eyes closed, his body sinking into the blanket as though her words were the safest place he had ever known. In that quiet moment, a truth settled over everyone who had witnessed the rescue. The dog had been pulled from the shadows, but it was not ropes or ladders that had truly saved him. It was the soft hand of a child, steady and patient, that had given him back his life. The first day the shepherd walked out of the clinic, the town seemed to hold its breath. He stepped through the door on careful paws, bandage clean and white, fur brushed smooth at last. The toddler was there in her blue dress, holding a simple rope leash the vet had made from soft cotton. She didn't pull it. She just held it like you hold a friend's hand. The dog glanced up at her, then at the road ahead, and took a slow step. Then another. The town watched a new beginning happen in small, patient moves. They walked home the long way on purpose. Past the store with the creaky sign. Past the bench where old men played checkers in the shade. People came out quietly, the way you do when you don't want to scare a moment away. Someone waved. Someone wiped their eyes. The butcher stepped to his doorway and said, "Got a good bone for him," and set it in brown paper on the stoop. The baker held up a paper sack and called, "Rolls for the little one." The dog did not rush. He stayed at the girl's side, close enough that their steps sounded like one sound. The market filled with life as it always did, voices, baskets, the bright bump of apples into a crate. But when the girl and the shepherd entered, a hush slid over the bustle for a heartbeat. Heads turned. A child tugged her mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's the dog." The mother nodded and smiled at the girl. "You did a brave thing," she said softly. The girl looked down, shy, and the shepherd leaned his shoulder gently against her leg like he knew how to carry part of her shyness with her. They walked the aisles together. The flower lady tucked a small daisy behind the child's ear. The vet, out on an errand, knelt and checked the bandage with quick, kind fingers. "Healing well," she said, and the dog stood still for her, eyes calm. A man who had once said he thought he heard raccoons bent to eye level with the shepherd and whispered, "I'm sorry I didn't come sooner." He didn't expect the dog to understand, but he said it anyway. The dog blinked, slow and easy, and the man's shoulders loosened like a tight knot had finally been worked free. People started to listen to sounds they used to ignore. If a screen door banged too many times at the end of the street, someone checked to see if the latch was broken for the old woman who lived there. If a baby cried longer than felt right, a neighbor texted to ask, "Need a hand?" The feed store set a cardboard box by the register labeled, "For voices we almost miss," and folks dropped in spare change. The money bought food for strays, a vet visit for a barn cat, and once, a bus ticket for a boy who needed to get home. No one called it charity. They called it listening. The barn changed too. It was still old, still honest about its age, but hands began to care for it again. A team came with hammers and stronger boards. They fixed the soft spots in the loft and added a rail so no one could fall. The ladder got a new rung where the gap had been. The roof stopped its long, slow sag. On a Saturday, children helped sweep while the adults cleared out the rusted things that had become part of the shadows. Someone tied a small bell by the door, not to sound an alarm, but to remind folks that this place had taught them how to hear. They didn't paint the barn red again. They left the wood the color time had made it, then added one bright thing: a small sign near the door. The sign said only one word, hand-lettered and true: "Listen." The dog learned the paths of the town the way water learns a riverbed. He knew where the best shade fell at noon, where the porch steps were high for his recovering paw, and where the creek ran shallow enough for him to stand and drink. He lay at the girl's feet when she drew with chalk. He followed her to the porch when her grandmother read stories in the warm, soft hour before dinner. When the wind rattled the window one night, the girl grabbed for her blanket, and the shepherd lifted his head, eyes on the door, body saying, "I am here." She slept again without fear. It was the girl who chose his name. They were back at the barn that had once held him like a secret and now held him like a memory that had learned to smile. The neighbors stood in a loose circle, the vet by the stall, the butcher, the baker, the flower lady, the man who had said raccoons, the old men from the checkerboard bench, and a few children with dust on their knees. The grandmother tied a fresh blue ribbon around a new collar, the same clean blue as the girl's dress. "What should we call him?" someone asked. Hands offered names: Brave, Lucky, Scout. The girl put her palm on the dog's neck and looked up at the loft where she had once been so small and so sure. "Hayloft," she said, simple as water. "Because that's where he was, and that's where I heard him." No one argued. The name fit like a door that swings just right. The vet took a tiny tag from her pocket, a small circle of metal she had made at the shop. On it was stamped, "Hayloft, never alone." The girl held the tag to the dog's chest for a long second, listening to the heartbeat behind it, then clipped it to the collar. The bell at the barn door moved in a little breeze, and the sound was soft and glad. When Hayloft walked through the market after that, people said his name with the kind of respect you save for true things. "Morning, Hayloft." "Looking good, Hayloft." Children asked if they could pet him, and he stood like a small, patient tree while their hands found the safe places behind his ears. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. He kept the girl in the corner of his eye and matched his steps to hers. The town changed in 100 small ways that add up to one big truth. A notice board went up next to the grocery with 3 columns: lost, found, and heard. Under heard, people pinned notes that said things like, "Soft meowing under the bridge Tuesday night," checked, "Kitten safe," and "Knocking at Mrs. Lane's back door in the wind," fixed the loose shutter. A teenager with loud music in his car started keeping it low near the houses at dusk. "Babies sleep then," he said when his friend asked why. "And some hurts get louder at night." They held a fair that fall, the way they used to when the fields were full. There were jars of jam, pies with leaf-cut tops, quilts folded like soft squares of sky. In the middle of it all, the girl and Hayloft walked side by side. A man from the next town over watched them pass and asked, "What's the story with that dog?" People told him. By the time they were done, his eyes were wet, and he bought 2 pies from a woman he'd never met just to have a way to say thank you for a story that wasn't even his. Sometimes, late in the day, the girl and Hayloft went back to the barn to sit in the doorway where light makes a bright stripe on the floor. The girl would line up her stones, now with one smooth, dark piece she said looked like the dog's eye the first time she saw it, scared but shining. Hayloft would lie with his chin on his paws, watching the dust turn in the sun. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. The barn said enough. The people who had once told their children, "Stay away," began to bring them to the barn to teach a different lesson. They would point at the ladder with its new rung and say, "See that? It was broken. We fixed it. That's what we do when we find broken things." They would touch the listen sign and say, "That's how we start." A teacher brought her class, and the kids took turns ringing the little bell and writing one sentence each about a time they had listened. "I heard my brother crying. I hugged him. I heard the wind and closed the window for Grandma. I heard a dog." Hayloft became more than a dog. He became a way to remember who they wanted to be. The vet started a Hayloft fund jar by her desk for folks who couldn't cover the whole bill. The barber kept a bowl of biscuits next to the combs. On Sundays, the pastor didn't preach about miracles. He told the story of a child who listened and a town that learned to, and he said, "That's how heaven grows here." One afternoon in winter, the wind rose fast and mean, and a thin cry whipped down the street. People looked up, looked out, and moved. No one waited to see if someone else would go. By the time the sound was traced to a pup caught behind a fence, 3 neighbors were already there with a blanket, a flashlight, and a calm voice. When they brought the pup to the clinic, Hayloft stood from the girl's side and watched with bright, steady eyes, tail sweeping once, twice, like he understood that the echo of his own rescue had reached farther than the barn. At night, when the house grew still and breath deepened in the rooms, Hayloft curled on his mat near the girl's bed. The tag on his collar clicked once when he circled, then fell quiet. The grandmother would pause at the doorway and listen, not for trouble, but for the soft sound of trust at rest. Some nights she thought she heard the barn bell, though the wind was calm. Maybe it was only memory. Maybe it was a promise. The town did not become perfect. No town does. But when something hurt, people heard it sooner. When someone needed, they said so louder. And when a child in a blue dress and a German shepherd with a scar on his paw walked by, folks remembered the day they chose who they would be. They remembered that a cry from a hayloft had reached them all and made them better. They remembered the name that turned fear into a story with a gentler ending. Hayloft would look up at the girl then, and the girl would look back, and they would keep walking, step for step, carrying with them a simple truth that did not need fancy words. We listen now. And when we listen, we love. The barn is quiet now. Its hayloft no longer hiding sorrow, but holding the memory of how one faint cry changed everything. Looking back, it wasn't strength or tools that began this rescue. It was the smallest hands, reaching out with innocence and trust. Sometimes the smallest hands uncover the greatest truths, truths we adults are too hurried or hardened to see. The shepherd, once a shadow trembling in the hay, became more than a dog saved from neglect. His survival became a living symbol of loyalty and second chances. Every wag of his tail told the town that pain can be healed, and every step beside the little girl reminded them that compassion often comes from the most unexpected places. The toddler's innocence carried a power far greater than fear. She did not turn away from the whimper everyone else ignored. She listened, and in listening, she saved a life. That simple act rippled outward, softening hearts, teaching a whole town to hear again. The lesson is clear: never ignore a cry for help, no matter how faint, no matter how small. Because behind that cry might be a story waiting to be rewritten, a soul waiting to be saved. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes loyalty never fades. Like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. Let this reminder travel farther than the hayloft, because compassion, once sparked, can light an entire world.